Well, today I think we have the chance to explore the ways that we are blind to the very presence of God in Jesus Christ, even when He is walking with us on every road where we trod. Now, you know surely that these two disciples traveling on this road to Emmaus on that day had been heartfelt followers of Jesus. But by their own account, they had become confused by their own missed expectations, by the political chaos in Jerusalem and a brutal killing of their leader. And they were even more perplexed by a female account of the missing body at the tomb and purported visions of talking angels. And then those most recent reports of that morning, confirmed by other followers who had gone to the grave to check out the women's stories, and those stories from them had done nothing to assuage their disappointment and doubt or to calm their anxiety. Because no one had actually seen Jesus. And so the logical conclusion was that the whole incident was the work of grave robbers, or perhaps that corrupt Roman military, those occupiers of Palestine. So they were sad and confused as they were walking along, believing that God had abandoned them. Now, an interesting part of the gospel story today is the part where Jesus joins them, walking on the road and teaching them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. They were so caught up in their own story of sadness that they failed to recognize the one who was walking along with them as the one for whom they were mourning. They were blind to him and his identity. Now, there is a certain protection for us in being blind, in not seeing things that we don't want to see or that we are not ready to see. There's kind of a protection in that. Let me tell you a joke. Now, I know it's 8 o'clock in the morning and all of you are in the back, but this is a joke. It was a hot day outside, so 3 nuns who were inside the church painting it decided to just take off their clothes to stay cool. And so they bolted the door. And they knew they were safe because it was inside the church. The church just had stained glass windows and nobody could really see in. So as they were working, they heard this knock at the door. And looking at each other, like, what do we do now? Well, they looked at each other, and one walked over to the door and said, "Who's there?" And they heard this reply, "The blind man." So they looked at each other, and they said, "Wow, we're in luck. No problem." One of them opened the door, thought, "We'll let this guy in. He can't see what we're doing anyway," and thought maybe it was someone that needed some help. And so they unbolted the door. The man walked in. He had these overalls on, and he took a look around, and he said, "Holy cow, sister, what a body. Where do you want the blinds?" Get it?
Got it.
Y'all are slow. I got to tell you, that sermon on Easter Sunday, they laughed on Saturday night, they laughed at 10 o'clock, and the 8 o'clock crowd, y'all didn't get it. Anyway, the sisters thought that they were protected by this other man's blindness. Now, but before I go on, I want to explore with you this question. To what are we blind? What parts of your life do you not see? What keeps any of us from recognizing Jesus? How exactly are our eyes shielded or blinded so that the God who loves us and knows us and saves us, the God who walks with us, is invisible to us? So, it's an interesting thing about blindness, because the Gospels are full of stories about the ways that we humans are blind. And those stories can be interpreted literally or emotionally or spiritually. But from these stories, we know that our sight can be limited by our own self-centeredness. That it's easy, we know that, right, for us to be so self-centered that we really don't notice what is going on around us. Sort of like it's easier to have one's head in the sand than to look up and actually see. For example, it is, after all, quite human and maybe even normal for each of us to assume that our lives are just like everyone else's life. That's like our default position. I mean, doesn't everyone have at least 2 cars in the driveway, a TV in every room, a bathroom off of every bedroom, a computer for every person, houses with expanded living space that are getting larger and larger, and not to mention plenty of food and clothing, health care, and education? If we never venture out, we can easily remain blind and believe that the way we live is the way that everybody lives. I've been reading this really funny book by a Cuban American here in the United States, Waiting for Snow in Havana. And he talks about himself and the childhood he remembers in Havana, being a member of the elite there before Castro came in. And he remembers these stories with great nostalgia, for he was sent to the United States without his parents, and he never saw them again. But he looks back on his early childhood, then after coming to the United States and living almost as an orphan. And he remembers back, and he remembers his blindness to the privilege of his life. And in the same way, I would say those among us who ventured down to Pigtown and volunteered at Paul's Place are regularly given new eyes to see. So let me ask you, have you ever entered a crack house? Have you seen the camping area of a homeless person in an abandoned building, or smelled the matted hair and soiled winter coat of a homeless street person? It changes the way you see yourself and the world, and blindness is no longer an option. Or for those of us who travel to Haiti, from whose eyes scales fall as new sight is gained about our common humanity, common hopes and dreams for ourselves and our families and our communities are the same as the hopes and dreams for families all over the world. Unblinded, we are then able to see the chronic economic undertow in undeveloped nations that lack access to capital or suffer amidst non-existent or collapsed infrastructure and make little progress on their hopes and dreams. Our assumptions break down in the face of the sight of potable water supplies contaminated with human waste, of uncollected garbage piled so high it blocks waterways from the mountains to the sea, or the sight of a decent man wincing when he eats with you because his stomach aches so consistently that a full plate of food offered to him, although a temptation and much-needed sustenance, is easily refused because he has a digestive system that is literally barely functional, so unaccustomed to modest portions of adequate nutrition. So at least one way that our eyes stay shut is through our believing that others live the way we live and never attempting to know about anything else outside our own comfort zone, never choosing to go anywhere that is challenging or different. Really, we're afraid, are we not? Afraid that we will not know how to handle it, we'll not know what to say, or worse. Often we're afraid that we might feel guilty or somehow responsible, and that might make us change. One of my best friends from growing up has been an enormous support to me over my 25 years of work in Haiti. She was the first person I heard from after the devastating earthquake in 2010 The next day, she wired me money, a few $1,000s, and said, do what they need. But she will never go to Haiti with me. She is too afraid that she will not be able to handle it, will not know what to do, and she admits that she doesn't like feeling that sad or being that powerless. But I also think that we fear that our hearts might be changed, that we might have to do something about what we see. So looking and seeing can be dangerous. Seeing Jesus himself, or even the face of Jesus in another, can be really dangerous. On Friday, Joe and I were at our diocesan convention, and we heard a sermon from Marianne Buddy, who's the bishop down in the Diocese of Washington. And her sermon was about how we see ourselves, and also really about overcoming our own blindness. She challenged us not to be blind and not to let our hearts be hardened as communities of faith. She believes that our tendency to see ourselves and define ourselves by our comfort zone and our preferences, and that our tendency to claim common identity, not with Jesus Christ nor others who are suffering out in the world, but with those whose preferences line up with our own, well, that could be problematic. She would even say sinful. So hang in there with me. So for example, here we are at St. John's, and we prefer our beautiful flowers on the altar and our lovely grounds and classic architecture and our Anglican form of sacred music and simple, understated church furnishings. We prefer lively sermons of a pastoral nature, but none that are too challenging. We often prefer to dive into deep theological debate, especially using our intellect, but we prefer that it not get too emotional, and for sure not to let anybody know if we are hurting or needy ourselves. Now, I might be exaggerating just a little, and none of you has given me any indication whether I'm speaking the truth to your own heart. But when it comes to following Jesus and reaching out beyond our walls, not just to serve those others who are not like us and need our help, when it comes to actually inviting people to join us in all aspects of community life, worship and praise, giving and receiving, well, don't we actually prefer that people who are like us, who share our preferences, just kind of find us? Going out to them is not our style. At least it's not very Episcopalian. Marianne Buddy says that when we fixate on our preferences only, without going deeper and without recognizing Jesus, our hearts are hardened. The lessons today show us that hardened hearts and blindness go together. Blindness and hard hearts say no to Jesus, who wants to walk with us on the road and to help us keep our eyes open and change our lives. But our hearts are not hard when we, like Jesus, are able to say, not your will, not my will, O Lord, but yours be done. Our eyes are opened, then we move beyond our own comfortable world and our own preferences, and we travel the road with Jesus, the road that Jesus invites us on. Those disciples that were on the road to Emmaus became the first church members. After Jesus had vanished from their sights, they said, were not our hearts burning within us when he was speaking with us on the road and opening to us the meaning of Scripture? Hearts that are burning are not hardened. That is when Jesus was recognizable to them and is recognizable to us. Is your heart burning? For what does your heart burn? I hope something. I hope there is some deep longing within you that captures your heart so that you are not afraid to look at it. I hope that with God's help and Jesus' guidance, you too, I hope we will find ourselves on a road like Emmaus, willing to speak about our own grief and loss, but always remembering that Jesus is walking with us, and then noticing our own hearts burning within us. But if we are not able to identify the road or the feeling of burning in our hearts or notice God's presence, I hope that we will consider placing ourselves in circumstances that are just a little risky, beyond our comfort zone. Maybe go down to Paul's place on one of the 2 days every month we go down there to serve. Come to Haiti. We will go next month from June 17th to 27th, and we go each January. For goodness sakes and for the sake of your soul, move beyond what you know and what is safe and protected. Be really bold and invite someone you know to church who may not share your preferences or your privileges, and see if you can find in them the face of Jesus or notice the hand of God at work. Amen.